Eating the frog. The brain has a limited window each day when its focus, willpower, and cognitive energy align at their peak. For most people, that window appears within the first few hours after waking. When dopamine levels are stable, cortisol is elevated just enough to promote alertness, and mental noise from the day hasn't yet built up. This is where the idea of eating the frog finds its strength, tackling the hardest, most meaningful task first, before the brain's resources begin to fragment. Neuroscientifically, the prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for decision-making, planning, and impulse control, functions most efficiently when unburdened by competing priorities. As the day progresses, cognitive fatigue sets in, a result of glucose depletion, constant context switching, and emotional distraction. Starting with the most demanding task leverages the early day clarity of executive function, minimizing procrastination loops that drain motivation later. Psychologically, completing a difficult task early activates the reward circuitry in the striatum, releasing dopamine and reinforcing a sense of agency. This success feedback increases motivation for subsequent tasks, creating momentum that compounds through the day. It's not just productivity, it's neural conditioning. The brain learns that effort leads to reward, rewiring its emotional association with challenge itself. The phrase, "eat the frog," traces back to a quote misattributed to Mark Twain. The idea that if you must eat a frog, it's best to do it first thing in the morning. Beneath the humor lies a profound truth about energy, attention, and decision fatigue. What feels like discipline is, in reality, timing. The brain's chemistry already favors hard work early. We simply align our choices with its rhythm. The result isn't just getting more done, but thinking from a place where resistance never has time to grow. The extended mind. The brain does not end at the skull. Every tool we use, from a pencil to a phone, effectively expands the boundaries of cognition, a phenomenon known as the extension of mind. It's the idea that thinking doesn't happen solely in the brain, but in the interaction between the brain, the body, and the environment. Cognitive scientists Andy Clark and David Chalmers introduced the concept in the late 1990s, arguing that objects which reliably store or process information, a notebook, a calendar, or a digital device, become part of the thinking system itself. The brain treats them as external memory, reducing internal load on working memory and the prefrontal cortex, which normally manage attention and planning. Neuroscience supports this view. Functional imaging shows that when we offload cognitive tasks, writing notes, sketching, or manipulating models, activity shifts from internal visualization networks to motor and sensory regions. The body and environment become active participants in reasoning, allowing for greater creativity and problem-solving depth. This distributed thinking system is why architects sketch, programmers whiteboard, and writers outline, not as decoration, but as externalized cognition. Over-reliance on digital aids, however, changes the equation. When we delegate memory to devices without engagement, the hippocampus forms weaker traces, reducing long-term retention. The extension of mind works best when tools are used as collaborators, not substitutes, augmenting rather than replacing mental effort. This idea reframes intelligence itself, not as something confined within neurons, but as a system that includes gestures, symbols, and spaces. The mind extends wherever attention and intention are anchored, from the neural to the physical, from thought to the world. Nootropics, enhancing cognition through chemistry, isn't new. It's just more precise. Nootropics, often called smart drugs or cognitive enhancers, are substances designed to improve focus, memory, or mental clarity without the trade-offs of overstimulation or crash. Unlike caffeine or amphetamines, true nootropics aim to optimize the brain's baseline performance rather than force it past its limits. The concept originated in the 1960s with Romanian chemist Corneliu Georgia, who coined the term nootropic from the Greek nous, mind, and tropein, to bend. His goal was not stimulation, but protection. He proposed 5 criteria. A nootropic should enhance learning and memory, protect the brain from injury, support interhemispheric communication, and exhibit minimal side effects. Biochemically, most nootropics work through neurotransmitter modulation and cerebral blood flow. Compounds like L-theanine promote alpha wave activity, creating a state of calm focus. Bacopa monnieri and Rhodiola rosea reduce oxidative stress, supporting long-term memory formation. Synthetic molecules like piracetam enhance acetylcholine function, improving neuronal signaling efficiency. The result isn't a burst of intelligence, but smoother, more reliable cognition, the difference between noise and signal. Modern neuroscience supports the idea that neurochemical balance, rather than stimulation, predicts sustainable performance. Substances that support mitochondrial energy production or synaptic plasticity improve mental endurance without triggering dependency cycles. In practice, the real value of nootropics isn't the promise of higher IQ. It's the subtle shift. Less fatigue, clearer recall, steadier mood that allows the mind to function closer to its potential. Nootropics don't replace effort or rest. They refine the terrain on which effort happens. Small chemical adjustments that make thinking feel the way it's meant to. Balanced, alert, and alive. NSDR. Rest isn't always sleep. The brain has a mode of recovery that mimics sleep's benefits without unconsciousness. NSDR, or non-sleep deep rest. It's a state where the body relaxes completely, while the mind remains quietly aware, allowing the nervous system to reset and restore focus. The science behind NSDR comes from studies of yogic nidra, a form of guided rest practiced for centuries. Neuroscientists later found that this state induces patterns similar to the early stages of sleep. Increased theta and alpha wave activity, reduced sympathetic arousal, and a measurable drop in cortisol. These shifts deactivate the body's stress response and re-engage the parasympathetic nervous system, which handles repair, digestion, and memory consolidation. During NSDR, the prefrontal cortex, responsible for conscious control, becomes less active, while the hippocampus and insula, areas linked to interoception and emotional integration, show increased synchronization. This allows fragments of experience, memory, and learning to reorganize beneath awareness, a process that enhances neuroplasticity and stabilizes attention afterward. The practice itself is simple: lying still, following slow breath, and listening to guided cues that move attention through the body. 10 to 20 minutes can restore mental clarity comparable to several hours of light sleep. Tech companies, athletes, and researchers now use NSDR to accelerate recovery between bouts of intense cognitive or physical work. Its effectiveness comes not from productivity, but from permission, the rare act of resting without distraction or demand. NSDR reminds us that the brain's performance doesn't only depend on how hard we push it, but on how deliberately we let it pause. Sensory deprivation. Perception doesn't stop when stimulation does. When the senses are deprived of input, the brain begins to listen inward, amplifying patterns of thought, emotion, and memory that are usually buried beneath constant sensory noise. This is the principle behind sensory deprivation, a deliberate reduction of external stimuli to restore balance to an overstimulated nervous system. In a world of persistent brightness and sound, the thalamus, the brain's sensory relay center, rarely enters rest. It continuously filters millions of inputs, prioritizing what reaches consciousness. When sensory flow is cut off, as in a flotation tank or darkened room, thalamic activity drops, and the default mode network, responsible for self-reflection and creativity, becomes dominant. This shift induces a state of calm wakefulness similar to early sleep or deep meditation, marked by an increase in theta wave activity and synchronized brain rhythms. Studies at the Laureate Institute for Brain Research found that an hour in near total sensory isolation reduces cortisol levels, lowers heart rate, and improves emotional regulation for up to 24 hours. Neural circuits linked to anxiety and overstimulation quiet down, while the insula, which processes internal bodily awareness, becomes more active. The mind's focus turns from reacting to the world to perceiving its own inner state. Historically, sensory deprivation was explored as a tool for creativity and recovery rather than escape. What makes it powerful isn't absence, but contrast. The mind reawakens to subtlety when the noise fades. In the silence of sensory deprivation, perception resets. The world doesn't disappear. It returns clearer, shaped by a brain that's had the rare chance to rest from reality in order to see it more completely. The 90-minute rule. Human alertness follows rhythm, not willpower. This rule works by aligning deep work with the brain's natural ultradian cycles, patterns of energy and focus that repeat roughly every hour and a half. Instead of forcing sustained concentration, it treats attention as a wave that rises, peaks, and falls. The brain's reticular activating system, which regulates arousal and alertness, oscillates in 90-minute intervals. During these phases, neural firing rates, hormone levels, and even body temperature subtly fluctuate. For the first 70 minutes, dopamine and norepinephrine levels rise, supporting sustained focus and motivation. Afterward, the brain begins to fatigue, and adenosine, a byproduct of energy use, builds up, signaling the need for rest. Working in deliberate 90-minute sessions harnesses the ascent of that focus curve, while short breaks at the end allow the brain to clear adenosine and reset for the next cycle. EEG, studies on cognitive performance, show that respecting these oscillations increases both accuracy and creative output. When ignored, performance plateaus, not from lack of effort, but from biological friction. The concept emerged from sleep research in the 1960s, when scientists like Nathaniel Kleitman observed that the same ultradian rhythm, guiding REM and non-REM cycles, continues throughout waking hours. Applied consciously, it creates a framework of deep engagement, followed by strategic disengagement, a rhythm of intensity and renewal. The 90-minute rule doesn't optimize time. It synchronizes with physiology. It's a reminder that the brain's best work comes not from endless effort, but from working in tune with the quiet, measurable pulse of its own design. Cold shower reset. The first breath is always a shock. Cold water hits the skin and the body reacts before the mind does. A sharp inhale, muscles tensing, heart rate spiking. For a few seconds it feels like chaos. Then something unexpected happens. The mind clears. Cold exposure is one of the oldest natural stressors we know. Long before it became a wellness trend, It was survival, a way for early humans to adapt, endure, and stay alert in harsh conditions. Modern science has begun to understand what those ancient instincts already knew. When we expose ourselves to brief, controlled cold, the brain wakes up in ways nothing else can. As the temperature drops, the body releases norepinephrine, a neurotransmitter linked to focus, attention, and mood regulation. Blood vessels constrict, circulation increases, and the nervous system switches from comfort to alert mode. It's not about punishment. It's about training the brain to stay calm inside discomfort. Regular cold showers do more than build tolerance. They appear to reduce inflammation, improve energy regulation, and even strengthen emotional stability. People often describe a kind of mental reset afterward. Not excitement, but clarity. The chatter in the head quiets, replaced by a steady awareness that feels earned. It's easy to think the benefit comes from the shock itself. But really, it's from what happens next. That moment you choose to stay instead of step out. In that space between resistance and acceptance, the brain learns something powerful. Fear isn't always a signal to stop. Sometimes it's a threshold worth crossing, because the cold never gets easier. We just get better at meeting it. The one problem journal. Most people end the day by thinking about everything that went wrong. The one problem journal turns that instinct into a tool. Instead of listing worries or goals, you write down just one unsolved problem, clearly, calmly, without trying to fix it. Then you close the notebook and go to sleep. This practice works because the brain doesn't stop processing when consciousness does. During sleep, networks responsible for memory and insight, particularly the hippocampus and the prefrontal cortex, stay active. They reorganize information, connect distant ideas, and sometimes find links you missed while awake. Psychologists call this incubation, the quiet background work of problem solving that happens when you're not trying to solve anything at all. By isolating a single problem before bed, you're directing that overnight computation. Instead of the mind drifting aimlessly, it orients around one meaningful question. This gives structure to subconscious processing, turning rest into strategy. The technique isn't new. Edison kept a notebook by his bed. Salvador Dali held a key in his hand while napping, using the moment before it dropped to capture ideas. Each found ways to harness the mind's twilight state. That blurred space where logic softens and imagination takes over. For most people, the result isn't a sudden breakthrough, but a gradual shift. Problems feel lighter the next morning, more manageable, sometimes even resolved. The act of defining them precisely seems to unlock part of the solution itself. It's a simple ritual that turns worry into direction. Because the mind doesn't always need more effort. Sometimes it just needs a question worth sleeping on. The teach-back trick. Explaining something out loud changes how the brain stores it. The teach-back trick works on a simple principle. Teaching is one of the most efficient forms of learning. When you try to explain an idea to someone else, even to an empty room, your brain reorganizes the information it holds, exposing what you truly understand and what you only think you do. The process activates multiple cognitive systems at once. The hippocampus retrieves the memory, the prefrontal cortex structures it into coherent language, and the parietal lobes translate it into spatial and contextual understanding. This multi-region cooperation deepens encoding, the stage where short-term knowledge becomes long-term memory. Psychologists call this the Feynman technique, named after physicist Richard Feynman, who famously used plain explanations as a test of comprehension. Modern research in cognitive psychology supports his intuition. Teaching forces active recall. The brain must reconstruct information without cues, and elaborative rehearsal, where explaining strengthens associations across neural networks. Both are known to enhance retention far more than passive review. In practice, the teach-back trick can be as small as summarizing what you just read, or as structured as explaining a complex concept in simple terms. What matters isn't the audience, it's the effort to clarify. Confusion that feels uncomfortable is precisely what signals growth. People who teach as they learn build metacognition, awareness of how they think, which leads to faster self-correction and more durable knowledge. Learning ends when information stops moving. Teaching keeps it alive, forcing ideas to circulate through language, logic, and memory until they become part of the mind's permanent architecture. The Iron Mindset workout, strength training, is often described in terms of muscle, resistance, overload, recovery. But inside the brain, every repetition tells a quieter story about persistence. The Iron Mindset workout isn't about aesthetics or physical endurance. It's about conditioning the brain to stay engaged under controlled stress. When we lift weights or push against resistance, the body releases a wave of neurochemicals: dopamine, serotonin, BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. These compounds don't just help muscles adapt, they reinforce neural pathways linked to focus, motivation, and resilience. The same circuitry that allows a person to finish a difficult set is the one that later helps them stay with a hard problem or a long project. The brain interprets voluntary physical strain as a signal of safety through challenge, stress by choice. Each time you push slightly beyond comfort, the prefrontal cortex learns to regulate the limbic system more effectively. This improves emotional control and lowers reactivity in everyday situations. Over time, discipline stops feeling forced. It becomes automatic, built into the nervous system. Historically, many cultures recognize this link between physical and mental strength. Spartan warriors, Buddhist monks, and Roman philosophers all used physical hardship as a form of cognitive training, a way to rehearse steadiness under pressure. Modern neuroscience simply gives it a new vocabulary. The Iron Mindset isn't about toughness for its own sake. It's a neurological rehearsal for effort, a dialogue between body and brain that turns strain into stability. Because resilience isn't built in crisis. It's built in practice. One rep, one decision, one signal to the mind that we can hold steady when it counts. Meditation. The mind isn't built for silence, it's built for noticing. Meditation trains that noticing, the ability to observe thought without becoming it. For decades, scientists treated meditation as a spiritual curiosity. Brain imaging changed that. Repeated studies now show that consistent practice alters both structure and function, increasing grey matter density in the prefrontal cortex and anterior cingulate, while reducing activity in the amygdala, the brain's threat detector. The result is measurable: improved attention, emotional regulation, and a calmer stress response. The mechanism is deceptively simple. During practice, attention drifts and is gently brought back, again and again. Each return strengthens neural circuits of awareness, like a muscle built through repetition. This loop, distraction, recognition, redirection, rewires how the brain manages focus and impulse. Long-term practitioners show decreased activation in the default mode network, the region tied to rumination and self-referential thought. In practice, that means less mental noise. You begin observing thoughts instead of identifying with them. Over time, This separation reshapes experience itself. Pain feels less engulfing, emotions less absolute. Historically, meditation wasn't an escape, but an investigation of the mind. Ancient traditions called it seeing clearly. Modern neuroscience now agrees. Clarity isn't mystical. It's trained attention, restoring the brain's ability to stay anchored in the present moment. The morning walk. Walking soon after waking does more for the brain than most realize. The movement, the rhythm of breathing, and the exposure to natural light combine to regulate nearly every system that governs alertness and mood. When sunlight hits the eyes, retinal ganglion cells send signals directly to the suprachiasmatic nucleus, the brain's internal clock. This resets the circadian rhythm, the cycle that determines when we feel awake or sleepy. Morning light also triggers a rise in cortisol, which, at the right time of day, promotes focus rather than stress. The same exposure suppresses melatonin production, aligning the body with its natural daylight rhythm and improving nighttime sleep quality. Adding motion amplifies the effect. Walking increases cerebral blood flow, delivering oxygen and glucose to regions involved in planning and creativity. The brain enters what researchers call the default mode network, an open, associative state that supports insight and problem solving. Many people experience their clearest ideas not at their desks, but while moving through a quiet street or park. Historically, philosophers like Aristotle, Kant, and Nietzsche all built walking into their thinking routine. They likely didn't know the neurochemistry, but they sensed the mental shift from deliberate thought to something looser, more connected. In a world where the day often begins with screens, a morning walk restores a slower rhythm, the kind the brain evolved to expect. It doesn't demand focus, it invites it. Because clarity isn't always found by sitting still. Sometimes it arrives one step at a time, with the simple act of moving forward in the light. The vision reminder. The brain is constantly negotiating what matters. Every action, thought, or distraction competes for the same limited pool of attention. The vision reminder works by giving that system a point of reference, a stable signal that helps the brain decide what deserves energy and what doesn't. At a neural level, motivation isn't a single emotion. It's a dialogue between the prefrontal cortex, which plans long-term goals, and the dopaminergic midbrain, which drives short-term rewards. Without alignment between the two, motivation becomes fragmented. Bursts of effort followed by drift. A written or visual reminder of a larger goal acts as a bridge between these systems. Each time the brain sees it, dopamine release becomes linked not to random novelty, but to meaningful progress. Research on goal priming supports this. Even subtle exposure to words or images tied to personal values increases persistence and decision accuracy. Over time, this conditioning redefines what rewarding feels like. Small tasks start to carry emotional weight because they are interpreted as steps towards something bigger. Historically, people have externalized direction in similar ways. Sailors marking their routes by stars, monks inscribing mantras, engineers pinning mission statements on their walls. Each is a method of reducing cognitive noise by anchoring attention to a single idea that outlasts mood and circumstance. The vision reminder isn't about willpower or inspiration. It's about neural consistency, keeping the brain's chemistry aimed in one direction long enough for meaning to accumulate. Because focus isn't born from intensity, it's built from alignment, the quiet agreement between what we want now and what we want most. The mind dump. The brain is a poor storage device for unfinished thoughts, It was built to solve problems, not hold them. When tasks, reminders, and worries accumulate, the mind keeps them active through a phenomenon known as the Zeigarnik effect, the tendency to remember incomplete tasks more vividly than completed ones. This constant background activity consumes working memory and increases cognitive fatigue. The mental load dump addresses that directly. It's the practice of writing down everything occupying mental space, tasks, ideas, concerns, or questions, without organizing or filtering them. The goal isn't productivity, it's clearance. Once the information leaves the head and lands on paper, the brain interprets it as handled. The prefrontal cortex, no longer holding multiple open loops, can finally disengage. Neuroscientific studies show that externalizing memory reduces stress by lowering activation in the anterior cingulate cortex, a region tied to error detection and anxiety. In simpler terms, the brain stops flagging unfinished business as a threat. This frees attention for reflection, creativity, and rest, capacities often dulled by mental clutter. Many high-performing individuals use similar rituals, writers dumping ideas before sleep, pilots running written checklists, therapists journaling after sessions. Each version serves the same neural purpose, to offload, not analyze. The mental load dump doesn't change what must be done. It changes how the brain relates to it. By creating distance between thinking and remembering, it restores a sense of cognitive quiet, a signal that the system is no longer on alert. Clarity often begins not with solving problems, but with placing them somewhere the brain no longer has to. Silent mornings. Silence changes how the brain wakes up. In the first hour after sleep, the prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for decision-making, planning, and focus, is still calibrating. Bombarding it with messages, news, or conversation forces rapid switching before it's ready, scattering attention and elevating stress hormones. Silent mornings protect that transition. Neuroscientifically, this period is called the sleep inertia phase. The brain is moving from the slow waves of rest into full alertness. When the shift happens gradually, the nervous system maintains a calm baseline, keeping cortisol and adrenaline within optimal range. Early silence allows the default mode network, the system active during reflection and imagination, to operate uninterrupted. That's why many people find their clearest thinking before they've spoken a word. Historically, silence at dawn has been part of daily rituals across cultures. Monks reciting prayers in stillness, writers avoiding conversation before work, even inventors, like Nikola Tesla, starting the day without words. The pattern reflects an intuitive understanding of the brain's need for quiet cognitive booting. Practically, a silent morning doesn't require isolation. It simply means postponing inputs, no talking, no screens, no reactive tasks, until the mind stabilizes. In that window, attention organizes itself naturally. Thoughts untangle, priorities form, and emotional tone for the day is set internally, not dictated by external noise. The benefit isn't mystical, it's neurological hygiene, giving the brain time to synchronize before being flooded with data. Because silence isn't the absence of sound, it's the presence of control. The brain deciding for a short while what deserves to enter. Brain food ritual. The brain consumes more energy than any other organ in the body, roughly 20% of everything we eat, yet it doesn't store its own fuel. The quality and timing of what we consume determine how efficiently it functions. The brain food ritual is less about diet plans and more about intentional nourishment, eating in a way that supports cognition, memory, and emotional balance. Every thought, decision, and movement depends on neurotransmitters, the brain's chemical messengers. These are built from nutrients. Omega-3 fatty acids form the membranes of neurons, improving electrical communication. Glucose from complex carbohydrates provides steady energy, preventing the fatigue linked to blood sugar swings. Antioxidants from berries and leafy greens reduce oxidative stress, protecting brain cells from gradual damage. Even small amounts of dark chocolate increase cerebral blood flow, enhancing alertness and mood. But the ritual aspect matters just as much as the ingredients. Eating with attention, away from screens or distractions, allows the parasympathetic nervous system to engage fully. This state, known as rest and digest, optimizes nutrient absorption and stabilizes cortisol levels. The brain registers nourishment not only through chemistry, but through context. The absence of hurry signals safety. Cultures have practiced versions of this for centuries. The Mediterranean habit of slow communal meals, the Japanese tradition of mindful eating, the simple act of giving thanks before food. Each reflects an understanding that how we eat shapes how we think. The brain food ritual is a daily reminder that cognition isn't just mental effort. It's biological precision. What we feed the brain becomes how clearly it sees, decides, and remembers. The daily win. The brain measures progress more powerfully than success. Dopamine, the neurotransmitter that drives motivation, responds not to achievement itself, but to evidence of movement, even the smallest sign that effort is leading somewhere. The daily win technique harnesses this mechanism by deliberately identifying one concrete action each day that represents forward motion, no matter how small. Neuroscientifically, progress activates the mesolimbic reward pathway, releasing dopamine in the nucleus accumbens. This chemical feedback loop reinforces behavior, signaling the brain that effort produces reward. Over time, this creates a self-sustaining motivation cycle, the same system that underlies learning, habit formation, and perseverance. Without it, the brain drifts toward apathy, unable to distinguish meaningful struggle from stagnation. Psychologists call this the progress principle. People experience more satisfaction from visible improvement than from completed outcomes. Recognizing a daily win reframes productivity as momentum rather than perfection. It's a shift from evaluation to reinforcement, from "did I finish?" to "did I move forward?" This small cognitive adjustment reduces burnout and strengthens resilience, especially in long-term or uncertain goals. Historically, similar methods appeared in craftsmanship and athletic training. Builders marked progress on stone walls. Athletes recorded minor gains in strength or endurance. The pattern remains the same. The brain stays engaged when it can see itself advancing. In practice, the daily win can be as simple as solving one small problem, writing one paragraph, or finishing one meaningful conversation. The task itself matters less than the recognition of movement. Progress, at its core, is the mind's preferred form of reward. And when the brain learns to celebrate the step instead of the summit, persistence becomes second nature. Napping. The brain doesn't tire evenly. Cognitive performance follows natural dips in alertness, typically in the early afternoon, a pattern rooted in the body's circadian rhythm. Napping takes advantage of this decline, not as a sign of weakness, but as a designed opportunity for recovery. During wakefulness, the brain accumulates adenosine, a byproduct of energy use that dampens alertness. A short nap clears part of this buildup, restoring mental clarity. Even a 20-minute rest can reduce reaction time, improve learning, and sharpen attention. What's remarkable is that these effects occur without entering deep sleep. The brain simply resets its neural balance. Research at NASA found that pilots who took brief naps during long missions improved performance by over 30%. Similar results have been observed in students and professionals. Memory consolidation strengthens, problem-solving improves, and emotional regulation stabilizes. In essence, the brain uses the brief pause to resort information, strengthening recent learning while pruning unnecessary noise. The timing and length of a nap determine its effect. 10 to 20 minutes refresh alertness. 30 to 60 enters slow-wave sleep and can cause grogginess on waking. The best naps end before deep sleep begins. Enough rest to restore, not restart, the system. Cultures have long embraced structured rest, the Mediterranean siesta, the Japanese inamori. These traditions aren't laziness, they're recognition of neurobiology. Napping reminds us that productivity isn't constant output, it's rhythm, periods of exertion balanced with renewal. The brain doesn't need more time to perform better, it needs the right kind of pause. Gratitude journaling. Gratitude is not an emotion that appears on command. It's a mental state the brain learns to access through repetition. Gratitude journaling works by training attention, the most limited resource in cognition, to focus on what's stable and positive, rather than what's missing or uncertain. Neuroscientific studies show that writing down things we're thankful for activates the ventromedial prefrontal cortex and the anterior cingulate cortex, regions linked to empathy, reward processing, and emotional regulation. Over time, these circuits strengthen, lowering activity in the amygdala, the brain's threat center. The result is a gradual recalibration. Stress triggers feel less immediate, and contentment becomes easier to sustain. This effect is not just psychological. Gratitude increases dopamine and serotonin availability, improving mood stability. Brain scans from participants who practiced consistent gratitude journaling for 3 weeks showed changes similar to those produced by mindfulness meditation. Slower reactivity, faster emotional recovery, and improved sleep quality. The practice itself is simple. Each night, list 3 specific things that brought value to the day. Precision matters. The brain learns through detail. A good meal with friends teaches the nervous system to recognize connection. Nice weather does not. Over time, this creates what psychologists call attentional bias toward positivity. The ability to spot good moments in real time, not only in hindsight. Gratitude journaling doesn't deny difficulty. It rewires perspective, turning the brain from a threat detector into a balance keeper. In a mind evolved to notice danger first, it's a quiet way of reminding ourselves that safety too deserves attention. Light movement. Movement doesn't need to be intense to reshape the brain. Even gentle activity, a short walk, stretching, or slow cycling, increases blood flow, oxygen, and nutrient delivery to neural tissue. This kind of light movement acts as a reset, improving mental clarity and emotional balance without triggering physical fatigue. At a cellular level, exercise releases brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF, a protein that supports the growth and survival of neurons. Light, consistent movement maintains steady levels of BDNF, promoting neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to form new connections. Unlike strenuous workouts, which can momentarily spike stress hormones, low-intensity movement keeps the nervous system in a parasympathetic, restorative state. The result is focus without agitation, an ideal condition for learning, problem-solving, or creative thinking. The cognitive benefit of light movement also comes from rhythm. Repetitive, balanced motion synchronizes neural oscillations between the hemispheres, improving coordination between motor and cognitive regions. This explains why ideas often surface during walks or while doing simple physical tasks. The brain, freed from overexertion, enters a fluid, associative mode that links concepts more easily. In many cultures, movement has always been woven into the fabric of thought. Monks pacing while reciting verses, mathematicians walking gardens to untangle equations. These traditions recognized what neuroscience now confirms. Motion refines perception. Light movement isn't exercise in the conventional sense, it's maintenance for the mind's internal environment. It keeps circulation steady, thoughts ordered, and emotions grounded. The brain, it seems, doesn't thrive on constant stillness or strain. It performs best in motion that feels almost effortless. Digital fast. At first, it feels strange. The absence of sound. No pings, no vibrations, no screens flickering in the corner of your eye. Just silence. For most people, that silence is no longer familiar. We've trained our brains to expect constant input, a steady drip of notifications, scrolling, and micro rewards. But every ping that feels harmless is part of something larger, a neurological loop built on dopamine. The digital fast is not a rejection of technology, it's a reset, a deliberate pause from stimulation so the brain can remember what quiet feels like. Neuroscientists describe it as reclaiming the dopamine baseline, the resting state of your reward system before it was trained to chase novelty every few seconds. When we step away from screens, the first thing we notice is restlessness. The mind searches for a hit of something new, but within a few hours, that noise begins to fade. Neural circuits tied to attention, particularly in the prefrontal cortex, start to stabilize. The stress hormone cortisol drops. The brain shifts from reaction to reflection. People who practice digital fasting often describe sharper thinking afterward, like fog lifting. The constant anticipation that once filled every spare moment, waiting for messages, updates, validation, starts to dissolve. What's left is not boredom, but presence. This practice doesn't demand disconnection forever, only awareness, to remind us that attention is finite, and every notification we ignore is a small act of reclamation. Because the world isn't getting quieter, but our minds still can. Hydration habit. The brain is nearly 75% water, yet it has no way to store it. Even slight dehydration, as little as 1 to 2% loss of body fluid, can reduce attention, slow processing speed, and impair short-term memory. The hydration habitus, less about drinking large amounts of water and more about maintaining a steady internal balance that keeps the brain's electrical and chemical systems stable. Neurons communicate through electrochemical signals. These impulses depend on the precise movement of sodium, potassium, and calcium ions across cell membranes, a process that relies on proper hydration. When fluid levels drop, ion exchange becomes less efficient, slowing the transmission of neural messages. At the same time, blood thickens slightly, reducing oxygen delivery to brain tissue. The result is subtle: fatigue, irritability, or a drop in mental clarity long before thirst is felt. Research from the University of Connecticut showed that even mild dehydration significantly increases perceived effort during cognitive tasks. The brain must work harder to achieve the same output, drawing on more energy and producing less focus. Rehydration quickly reverses this effect, improving vigilance and mood regulation within minutes. Hydration also affects neurotransmitter balance. Adequate water supports serotonin and dopamine synthesis, stabilizing emotional tone. Regular intake, small amounts spread throughout the day, prevents the hormonal stress response that dehydration can trigger. This isn't about chasing a number of liters, but about rhythm. Consistent intake aligned with the body's needs. The mind runs on chemistry, and chemistry runs on fluid. In the end, the simplest form of mental maintenance may be the most overlooked, keeping the system conductive enough for thought itself to flow. Caffeine timing. Caffeine doesn't create energy. It borrows it. The brain's sense of alertness depends on adenosine, a chemical that accumulates while we're awake and signals fatigue. Caffeine works by blocking adenosine receptors, masking tiredness rather than removing it. The effect feels immediate, but the timing of when we drink it determines whether it helps or harms long-term focus. After waking, cortisol, the body's natural alertness hormone, peaks within 30 to 45 minutes. Consuming caffeine during that window blunts cortisol's rhythm and trains the brain to depend on an external stimulant instead of its own regulatory cycle. Research from the University of Sheffield and the US Army's Walter Reed Institute both found that delaying caffeine intake by about 90 minutes after waking preserves the natural cortisol rise while still enhancing focus later in the morning. Once caffeine enters the bloodstream, it reaches the brain within 10 to 20 minutes, temporarily increasing dopamine and norepinephrine activity in the prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for concentration and working memory. But as adenosine continues to build in the background, a crash follows when caffeine wears off, especially if consumed too frequently or too late in the day. Strategic timing matters more than quantity. 1 or 2 well-placed doses, mid-morning or early afternoon, sustain performance without disrupting sleep or raising baseline stress hormones. Athletes and cognitive workers alike use this rhythm to stay sharp without overstimulation. Caffeine is most effective when it complements the brain's natural cycles rather than replacing them. Its real benefit isn't the surge it provides, but the precision with which it can extend clarity, when used as chemistry, not as habit. Alternate nostril breathing. Breathing is one of the few automatic functions we can consciously control, and that makes it a direct line into the nervous system. Alternate nostril breathing, known in yogic practice as Nadi Shodhana, uses this control to balance activity between the 2 hemispheres of the brain and regulate the body's stress response. Each breath subtly affects the autonomic nervous system. Inhaling through the right nostril tends to activate the sympathetic branch, increasing alertness and heart rate. Inhaling through the left engages the parasympathetic branch, promoting calm and recovery. Alternating between them creates rhythmic balance, a measurable shift in heart rate variability, oxygen exchange, and neural synchrony. Modern research supports what ancient traditions observed. Functional MRI and EEG studies show that slow, alternate nostril breathing stabilizes activity in the prefrontal cortex, improves interhemispheric communication, and lowers amygdala activation, reducing emotional reactivity. Regular practice increases alpha brain waves associated with relaxed focus and can even enhance cognitive flexibility, the ability to switch between tasks and perspectives efficiently. In practical terms, the technique works best when done for a few minutes each day. Slow, steady cycles of breath with gentle pauses. It's not about oxygen quantity, but rhythm. The alternating airflow acts as a metronome for the brain, guiding both physiology and attention toward equilibrium. Historically, the practice was described as cleansing the energy channels of the body. In modern terms, it clears neural noise, quieting overactive circuits and recentering awareness. Alternate nostril breathing doesn't change what we think. It changes the state from which thinking begins. A state where balance itself becomes the source of clarity. Mind-wandering ritual. The human brain isn't designed for constant focus. It works in cycles, periods of concentration followed by intervals of mental drift. What we call mind-wandering isn't distraction. It's a built-in cognitive process that restores creativity, consolidates memory, and refines long-term thinking. Turning that process into a habit, a mind-wandering ritual, allows the brain to think freely, without the interference of directed attention. When attention relaxes, the default mode network, or DMN, becomes active. This set of brain regions, including the medial prefrontal cortex and posterior cingulate cortex, takes over when we are not focused on a task. It stitches together fragments of memory, imagination, and emotion to form coherent narratives, a kind of spontaneous simulation engine. It's in this state that the brain links distant ideas, leading to creative insight or subtle self-understanding. Experiments using fMRI show that people who spend time in controlled mind-wandering, daydreaming while walking, showering, or performing simple routines, perform better on divergent thinking tasks. The brain, freed from immediate demands, continues to solve problems in the background, often producing breakthroughs later labeled as intuition. Historically, this was recognized long before neuroscience. Philosophers, scientists, and artists have long described the importance of stepping away, letting the mind drift until patterns emerge on their own. In daily life, the mind-wandering ritual might be 5 quiet minutes without a goal. No phone, no stimulation, just unstructured thought. Its value lies in what can't be forced: integration, creativity, and emotional clarity. Focus sharpens ideas. Wandering connects them. The brain needs both to think completely. Noise gradient control. The brain's ability to focus depends as much on sound as on silence. Every environment carries a unique noise gradient, a balance between randomness and predictability that shapes how attention behaves. Too much noise overwhelms the auditory cortex, fragmenting concentration. Too little, and the absence of stimulation can make the mind restless. Noise gradient control is the deliberate tuning of that sound environment to match the cognitive state we want to create. Neuroscientists describe how steady, low-frequency sounds, such as brown or white noise, mask unpredictable auditory inputs. This stabilizes activity in the thalamus and prefrontal cortex, 2 regions central to sustained attention. Instead of reacting to every external sound, the brain settles into rhythmic predictability, freeing working memory for higher-order thought. That's why many people find it easier to concentrate with a quiet hum, a fan, or rain sounds in the background. Different frequencies produce distinct effects. White noise distributes energy evenly across frequencies, improving vigilance and short-term recall. Brown noise, deeper and softer, enhances calm focus by reducing cortical excitability. Some forms of pink noise, closer to natural soundscapes, can even support sleep and memory consolidation by synchronizing brainwave patterns. The practice is not about finding silence, but about creating consistency. Adjusting sound rather than fighting it aligns neural rhythms with the external environment. In offices, libraries, or crowded homes, this control can mean the difference between constant micro-distraction and sustained clarity. Attention doesn't thrive in quiet or chaos alone. It thrives in tuned environments, where sound becomes structure, and the brain can finally stop listening for interruptions. Retrieve, don't reread. Memory doesn't strengthen through exposure. It strengthens through effort. Reading something repeatedly may feel productive, but it gives the brain familiarity, not mastery. The real consolidation of knowledge begins when we try to retrieve it, when the brain is forced to reconstruct information without cues. This principle, known as active recall, forms the basis of the technique. Retrieve, don't reread. When we retrieve, the hippocampus and prefrontal cortex work together to rebuild neural patterns associated with stored information. Each reconstruction deepens the connections between neurons, making future recall faster and more reliable. In contrast, rereading mostly activates recognition pathways, the sense of, "I've seen this before," which can deceive us into believing we've learned something when we've only made it familiar. Cognitive psychologists Henry Roediger and Jeffrey Karpik demonstrated this difference in a landmark study at Washington University. Students who tested themselves after initial learning remembered far more a week later than those who simply reread the material multiple times. Retrieval created stronger, longer-lasting traces in memory, a phenomenon now known as the testing effect. The practice is straightforward. Instead of reviewing notes, close them. Try to explain a concept from memory, write out what you recall, or answer your own questions before checking the source. The small strain of remembering is the signal the brain uses to mark information as important. Rereading is comfort. Retrieval is construction. Every time we reach for a memory and rebuild it, we teach the brain that knowledge is not stored, it's continually made. Default mode walks. When we walk without a destination, something unusual happens in the brain. The default mode network, a system once dismissed as idle, becomes active. This network, spanning the medial prefrontal cortex, posterior cingulate cortex, and hippocampus, is responsible for introspection, imagination, and the integration of past and future thought. A default mode walk deliberately engages this state, walking not for exercise or productivity, but to let thought unfold on its own. Research from the University of Graz and Stanford University shows that mild rhythmic movement like walking increases cerebral blood flow and loosens constraints on attention. As physical activity maintains gentle arousal in the motor cortex, the prefrontal regions, normally focused on goal-directed tasks, relax. This shift allows associative thinking to emerge, linking distant ideas that rarely meet under concentration. Many creative insights, from Darwin's theories to modern design breakthroughs, have occurred in such states. Unlike focused work, the default mode doesn't seek solutions directly. It reorganizes mental material in the background, connecting fragments of memory, emotion, and experience into coherent understanding. Regular walks in this unfocused state improve divergent thinking, emotional regulation, and even empathy, abilities rooted in perspective taking and self-reflection. The technique requires no structure, a short walk without input, no phone, no clear agenda. The key is the absence of purpose, which paradoxically makes room for clarity. The default mode walk is not about escaping thought, but allowing it to breathe. The brain, when left to wander in rhythm with the body, often finds what deliberate effort cannot: quiet order within motion. Creative constraints, Creativity doesn't thrive in freedom. It thrives in boundaries. When possibilities are endless, the brain struggles to decide where to begin. Creative constraints transform that uncertainty into focus, forcing the mind to dig deeper instead of wider. Neuroscience explains this through cognitive load. The brain has limited working memory. Too many choices flood it with noise. When constraints narrow the field, the prefrontal cortex and anterior cingulate cortex shift from scanning for options to pattern generation, connecting familiar elements in novel ways. Paradoxically, restriction frees neural resources for insight. Studies from the University of Amsterdam and Harvard Business School show that moderate constraints, like time limits, limited materials, or specific themes, consistently improve originality and problem solving. These conditions heighten divergent thinking, the ability to generate multiple ideas from a single source. When options are scarce, the default mode network, responsible for imagination, interacts more efficiently with executive control regions, balancing freedom and order. Historically, this principle shaped art and science alike. Haiku poetry, confined to 17 syllables, distills emotion with precision. Jazz musicians improvise within harmonic structure. Even NASA's engineers during Apollo 13 solved a life-or-death problem using only what was available in the spacecraft. Constraint doesn't limit expression, it defines it. In practice, creative constraints can mean setting smaller canvases, tighter deadlines, or fewer tools. The restriction directs energy inward, toward recombination and refinement rather than expansion. The brain's potential doesn't depend on how much it can do, but on how intelligently it is cornered. Sometimes, the shortest route to invention begins with a line you're not allowed to cross. Incubation gaps. Progress often happens in pauses. In problem solving and creative thinking, breakthroughs rarely occur while we're actively trying to find them. They emerge later, during what psychologists call incubation gaps. These are intentional periods of disengagement where the brain continues to process information beneath conscious awareness. When focus relaxes, the default mode network becomes active, connecting distant neural pathways that remain isolated during concentrated effort. At the same time, the prefrontal cortex, responsible for analytical control, reduces its interference. This allows weaker or less obvious associations to surface, the kind that often lead to insight. In this state, the brain reorganizes information, tests possibilities, and resolves cognitive deadlocks without our awareness. Research from the University of Amsterdam and Northwestern University shows that people who take short breaks between intense work sessions outperform those who persist continuously. The temporary distance doesn't interrupt thinking, it improves it. Neural representation of the problem becomes more abstract, enabling flexible recombination of ideas once attention returns. The incubation gap can last minutes or hours, a walk, a shower, or quiet downtime. The critical element is cognitive detachment, stepping away without substituting one form of stimulation for another. In these intervals, the mind performs silent synthesis, integrating what effort alone cannot. Throughout history, inventors and artists have relied on this process intuitively. Archimedes in his bath, Poincaré during his strolls, countless writers mid-draft. Their moments of sudden clarity were not spontaneous. They were prepared by pause. The incubation gap reminds us that thinking isn't always an act of doing. Sometimes, the brain's most productive state is stillness, with something quietly unfolding underneath. Pomodoro Reset. Sustained focus has a biological limit. After roughly 20 to 30 minutes of intense mental effort, the brain's ability to filter distraction and sustain working memory begins to decline. The Pomodoro Reset takes advantage of that limit rather than fighting it, structuring work into short, concentrated intervals, followed by deliberate pauses to restore neural efficiency. The technique traces back to the late 1980s, when Francesco Cirillo used a tomato-shaped kitchen timer, Pomodoro in Italian, to manage study sessions. What began as a productivity experiment later found grounding in neuroscience. Research on attention fatigue shows that prolonged focus depletes glucose and oxygen in the prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for decision-making and executive control. Micro-breaks, even as brief as 2 to 5 minutes, allow blood flow and metabolic activity in these regions to recover, resetting the system's ability to sustain effort. Each work interval, typically 25 minutes, engages the brain's task-positive network, the circuitry for focused, goal-directed thinking. The subsequent break activates the default mode network, which handles reflection, memory integration, and creative recombination. Alternating between the two prevents mental rigidity and maintains clarity across longer periods. Used consistently, the Pomodoro Reset doesn't just improve productivity, it recalibrates the brain's sense of rhythm. Tasks feel less overwhelming, decisions more deliberate, and mental fatigue less cumulative. Focus, it turns out, isn't about endurance. It's about pacing, giving the brain time to breathe between bouts of precision. The Pomodoro Reset works not by forcing attention longer, but by teaching it when to rest and return sharper than before. Social interaction, human connection, is not just emotional, it's neurological. The brain evolved for social interaction long before language or writing existed. Every conversation, glance, or shared gesture engages a network of systems designed to interpret signals, predict responses, and create alignment between minds. The social interaction habit strengthens these systems and, in doing so, improves cognitive performance, emotional regulation, and even longevity. When two people interact face-to-face, the prefrontal cortex, temporoparietal junction, and mirror neuron system synchronize their activity. This process, known as interpersonal neural entrainment, allows the brain to model another person's emotions and intentions in real time. The same circuits used for empathy and understanding also underpin problem-solving and flexible thinking. In other words, every meaningful conversation is mental cross-training. Social contact also regulates key neurochemicals. Oxytocin promotes trust and reduces stress. Dopamine reinforces reward and motivation, and serotonin contributes to emotional stability. Chronic isolation, by contrast, reduces neural plasticity and increases inflammation, measurable effects that impair both mood and cognition. Psychologists at Harvard and Stanford have shown that brief, authentic social exchanges, even short interactions with acquaintances, boost working memory and processing speed. The reason is simple. The unpredictability of conversation keeps the brain adaptive, forcing it to interpret context, tone, and timing on the fly. In daily life, the brain benefits most not from quantity of contact, but from quality, the kind of presence where attention is mutual and devices are absent. Social interaction isn't a distraction from thinking. It's part of how the brain thinks, an external network that strengthens the one within. Sunlight exposure. Light is the first signal the brain receives each day. Before food, caffeine, or conversation, sunlight tells the body what time it is and what kind of chemistry to run. When natural light enters the eyes, retinal ganglion cells containing melanopsin send direct input to the suprachiasmatic nucleus, the brain's master clock. This signal resets the circadian rhythm, synchronizing nearly every system, from hormone release to metabolism to mood regulation. Morning sunlight raises cortisol at the proper time, promoting alertness and energy. That same exposure suppresses melatonin, helping the brain distinguish day from night and improving sleep quality hours later. The color and intensity of sunlight matter. Early daylight carries a balanced spectrum of wavelengths that artificial lighting rarely replicates. These wavelengths modulate serotonin production in the brainstem, influencing motivation and emotional stability. That's why consistent morning light exposure has been shown to reduce symptoms of seasonal depression and improve cognitive function across age groups. The effect is not limited to mood. Exposure to natural light enhances retinal dopamine, which sharpens visual processing and may even protect against eye strain and myopia. Combined, these responses create what neuroscientists call entrainment, the alignment of internal biological rhythms with the external world. Historically, humans structured their entire routines around light cycles, waking with sunrise, resting near dusk. Modern environments disrupt this balance, replacing sunlight with screens and indoor bulbs that confuse the body's timing mechanisms. Stepping outside within the first half hour of waking is enough to restore that connection. Sunlight isn't just brightness. It's information, a daily message to the brain that the day has begun, and the system can align itself with the world again. Mental contrast visualization. Visualizing success feels good, but by itself, it rarely works. The brain interprets imagined achievement as partial completion, lowering the drive to act. Mental contrast. Visualization corrects that error by pairing positive imagery with an honest picture of the obstacles that stand in the way. This simple shift turns fantasy into focus. The method originates from the work of psychologist Gabriele Oettingen, who found that people who visualized both desired outcomes and realistic barriers showed stronger motivation and better long-term follow-through. The brain mechanisms behind this are well mapped. When we imagine success, the ventral striatum, part of the reward system, releases dopamine, creating anticipation. But when we immediately contrast that image with the difficulties ahead, the prefrontal cortex activates, translating desire into planning and self-regulation. The two systems, emotional drive and executive control, begin to work in synchrony rather than isolation. Unlike traditional positive thinking, mental contrast doesn't inflate confidence, it calibrates it. By mentally rehearsing both progress and friction, the brain forms a predictive model that reduces surprise and builds persistence. Athletes, surgeons, and astronauts use this approach to prepare for high-stakes situations, not by imagining flawless outcomes, but by walking through what could go wrong and how to respond. The practice is straightforward. Visualize the goal in detail, then immediately picture the most likely internal or external challenge. The sequence matters: hope, then obstacle. Over time, the brain learns to pair optimism with readiness. Mental contrast doesn't make goals easier. It makes them real, anchoring imagination to the terrain of effort where change actually happens. Slow yoga flow. Deliberate movement reshapes attention. In slow yoga flow, the focus isn't on flexibility or strength, but on timing, aligning movement with breath at a pace that keeps the nervous system calm while keeping the body engaged. This slow rhythm forms a dialogue between the motor cortex, which directs motion, and the insula, which monitors internal sensation. Over time, that connection improves interoception, the brain's ability to sense what's happening inside the body. When movement slows, sensory feedback becomes more precise. Each shift in balance or muscle tension sends data through the somatosensory cortex, refining the brain's body map. This heightened awareness doesn't just improve coordination, it stabilizes emotional regulation. Studies from Harvard and the University of Illinois show that mindful, slow yoga activates the parasympathetic nervous system, lowering heart rate and cortisol levels, while increasing grey matter density in regions linked to self-awareness and empathy. Unlike vigorous exercise, which floods the body with adrenaline, slow yoga sustains mild effort under conscious control. The prefrontal cortex stays active, monitoring breath, alignment, and sensation. A rare condition where physical exertion coexists with cognitive stillness. This balance trains the brain to manage stress without withdrawal or overreaction. The practice's origins in ancient India framed it as a method of unifying body and mind, but neuroscience describes it more precisely as entrainment, a synchronization between physiology and attention. Slow yoga flow functions less as a workout and more as calibration. It tunes internal systems into coherence, reminding the brain that control and calm are not opposites, but different expressions of the same precision. Breathing before bed. The transition from wakefulness to sleep isn't a switch. It's a negotiation between two branches of the nervous system. During the day, the sympathetic system keeps the body alert and responsive. To fall asleep, the parasympathetic system must take over, slowing heart rate, relaxing muscles, and quieting mental activity. Breathing before bed works by accelerating this shift through a single controllable channel: the breath. Slow, structured breathing alters the body's chemistry within minutes. When exhalations become longer than inhalations, the vagus nerve, a central component of the parasympathetic system, sends inhibitory signals to the heart and brainstem. This reduces noradrenaline, a neurotransmitter that sustains alertness, while increasing acetylcholine, which promotes calm and recovery. EEG studies show that such breathing patterns increase alpha and theta brainwave activity, the same states linked to the onset of sleep. Research from Stanford University and Harvard Medical School has confirmed that controlled breathing lowers cortisol levels and improves sleep onset latency, the time it takes to fall asleep. It also reduces nighttime awakenings by stabilizing carbon dioxide and oxygen balance, which helps regulate blood flow to the brain's emotional centers, including the amygdala. The technique can be simple. Inhale through the nose for 4 counts, exhale for 6, repeat for several minutes. The goal is not sedation, but rhythm, reminding the body that safety has returned and vigilance is no longer needed. Breathing before bed reframes sleep not as the absence of thought, but as the body's deliberate act of releasing control, one breath at a time, until awareness gives way to rest. The 2-minute rule. Procrastination isn't caused by laziness. It's a product of cognitive resistance, a reflex in the brain that overestimates effort and underestimates momentum. The 2-minute rule bypasses that reflex by lowering the threshold for action. If a task takes less than 2 minutes, do it now. If it takes longer, start it for just 2 minutes. The simplicity hides a precise neurological mechanism. When we delay action, the amygdala, the brain's emotional alarm system, interprets the task as a potential threat. It activates avoidance pathways that suppress the prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for planning and decision-making. Beginning a task, however small, reverses that signal. Once motion begins, the dopaminergic system in the midbrain releases small bursts of dopamine, shifting perception from avoidance to engagement. This creates what neuroscientists call the progress loop, the chemical reward that reinforces continued action. Research from the University of Michigan and the London Business School shows that micro starts dramatically increase completion rates for complex goals. The brain's motivational architecture prefers continuity to initiation. It's harder to begin than to keep going. By tricking the system into starting, the 2-minute rule transforms hesitation into momentum without willpower. Behaviorally, it redefines productivity not as discipline, but as friction management. Each completed micro-task reduces cognitive clutter, freeing mental bandwidth for deeper work. The 2-minute rule doesn't make tasks smaller. It makes the brain braver. Because once effort begins, resistance fades, and what felt impossible a moment ago becomes simply the next step in motion. Evening light. Hygiene. Light is the most powerful regulator of the brain's internal clock. The evening light hygiene technique centers on a simple truth. When and how we encounter light after sunset determines the quality of our sleep, mood, and next-day cognition. Inside the brain's suprachiasmatic nucleus, a cluster of neurons in the hypothalamus, sits the master circadian clock. It synchronizes daily rhythms of hormone release, temperature, and alertness to the cycle of light and dark. When evening light, especially blue wavelengths from screens or LEDs, reaches the retinal ganglion cells in the eyes, these cells signal the clock that it's still daytime. The result is a delay in melatonin secretion, increased alertness, and fragmented sleep architecture hours later. Studies from Harvard Medical School and the University of Colorado have shown that just 2 hours of exposure to artificial light before bed can suppress melatonin by up to 23% and shift the body's natural sleep timing by more than an hour. The cognitive effects appear the next day: slower reaction times, reduced memory retention, and elevated stress hormones. Evening light. Hygiene doesn't mean darkness, it means intentional dimming. Using warmer tones below 2700 Kelvin, reducing overhead brightness, and avoiding screens 60 minutes before sleep all help the circadian system transition smoothly. This allows melatonin to rise predictably, preparing the brain for the deep, synchronized slow-wave sleep that restores both memory and emotional balance. Light shapes time as the brain understands it. By controlling it after sunset, we're not just protecting sleep, we're teaching the mind when to rest and when to begin again. The information diet. The brain is shaped less by what it creates and more by what it consumes. Every headline, video, and notification becomes a piece of input that competes for neural real estate, subtly influencing attention, mood, and thought patterns. The input diet is built on this principle, that the quality of what we feed the mind determines the quality of what it produces. Cognitively, the brain is a prediction engine. It learns by exposure, constantly forming models of reality based on the data it receives. When that data is fragmented or emotionally charged, as it often is in digital consumption, neural pathways associated with novelty and reactivity strengthen. The dopaminergic system rewards rapid scanning, not depth. Over time, this shifts the brain's baseline, making sustained focus or deep thought feel unnatural. Reducing unfiltered input restores balance. When the brain is given fewer, higher quality signals, it begins to prioritize pattern recognition over distraction. The prefrontal cortex, which governs executive control, regains dominance over the limbic system, the seat of impulse. Studies on digital fasting show that even brief periods of controlled input improve working memory, emotional regulation, and creativity. The mind starts curating instead of reacting, an essential distinction for cognitive stability. Historically, every intellectual tradition has practiced some version of this. Monks limiting conversation, writers isolating before creating, scientists working in silence. The input diet isn't abstinence, it's filtration. It asks, what deserves space in your mental environment? In a world of constant noise, the sharpest mind isn't the one that consumes the most information, it's the one that learns to protect its bandwidth. Sleep defense. Sleep is not rest, it's repair. During deep sleep, the brain performs essential maintenance that no waking state can replicate. The sleep defense technique treats this process not as a luxury, but as a physiological priority, protecting it from the erosion of modern routines. While we sleep, the glymphatic system, a network of channels surrounding the brain's blood vessels, becomes active. It flushes out metabolic waste such as beta amyloid, a compound linked to cognitive decline. This cleaning cycle operates almost exclusively during non-REM sleep, when cerebrospinal fluid pulses through neural tissue at 10 times the daytime rate. Missing even one night of quality sleep impairs this process, leading to measurable reductions in attention, memory, and emotional regulation. At the same time, the hippocampus, which encodes new experiences, transfers information to the neocortex for long-term storage. This reorganization underpins learning and creativity. Sleep deprivation disrupts this transfer, leaving memories unstable and reasoning fragmented. Even partial restriction, 6 hours instead of 8, accumulates like debt, altering glucose metabolism and increasing cortisol levels that dull focus the following day. The principle of sleep defense is consistency. Aligning sleep with natural circadian rhythms, minimizing blue light at night, maintaining fixed bedtimes, and preserving cool, dark conditions, strengthens melatonin release and stabilizes hormonal cycles. Protecting sleep in this way isn't about discipline, it's about preserving neural integrity. Every cognitive function depends on this nightly reset. When we defend sleep, the brain doesn't just recover. It rebuilds the very systems that make wakefulness sharp, stable, and clear. Temperature drop trick. Falling asleep isn't just about shutting down thought, it's about cooling down the body. The temperature drop trick leverages one of the brain's oldest biological cues, a decline in core temperature signals that it's time to sleep. When used intentionally, it can accelerate sleep onset and improve depth of rest. The suprachiasmatic nucleus, the brain's circadian timekeeper, governs not only light sensitivity, but also temperature regulation. As evening approaches, it directs blood vessels in the skin to widen, allowing heat to dissipate. This gradual cooling of about 1 degree Celsius helps trigger melatonin release and shifts the body toward non-REM sleep. When this drop is delayed, by late exercise, warm rooms, or glowing screens, the brain remains physiologically daytime alert. The trick lies in amplifying this natural signal. A warm shower before bed, paradoxically, works because it accelerates cooling afterward. When you step into cooler air, your body temperature falls more quickly, aligning the brain's sleep readiness. Similarly, lowering room temperature to around 18 degrees Celsius or using breathable bedding supports the same effect. Research from the University of Sydney and Harvard Medical School shows that small manipulations in skin temperature can reduce sleep latency by up to 30%. Temperature also influences sleep quality. Cooler environments increase time spent in slow-wave sleep, the stage when the glymphatic system clears waste and the brain consolidates memory. The temperature drop trick is less a hack than a return to alignment, a reminder that comfort at night doesn't mean warmth, but the quiet precision of a brain returning to its natural rhythm. Curiosity burst. Curiosity is one of the brain's most efficient motivators. It turns learning from obligation into instinct. A curiosity burst, just a few minutes spent exploring a question you don't already know the answer to, can activate neural systems that sharpen focus, memory, and mood long after the moment ends. Neuroscientists at the University of California, Davis, found that curiosity triggers the dopaminergic circuit, particularly the ventral tegmental area and nucleus accumbens, regions responsible for anticipation and reward. When curiosity rises, dopamine release increases, preparing the brain to absorb information more effectively. What's remarkable is that this heightened state of learning extends beyond the topic itself. Unrelated information learned at the same time is also remembered more clearly. The practice is simple. Choose a question that genuinely sparks interest, not because it's useful, but because it's unknown. Spend 5 minutes investigating it. The question can be trivial or profound. The effect comes from engagement, not importance. Each small burst trains the brain to associate learning with pleasure rather than pressure, reconditioning the reward system that often becomes dulled by passive information overload. Historically, curiosity was viewed as distraction, something to be managed. Today, research shows it's the opposite, a mental reset that refreshes attention and reopens cognitive flexibility. The brief pursuit of an unanswered question increases the brain's readiness for deep work, making it a bridge between rest and concentration. Curiosity doesn't demand commitment or mastery. It asks only for presence, a moment of wondering before knowing. And in that small act of asking, the brain remembers what it was built for: discovery. Body scan awareness. Attention-directed inward changes how the brain experiences the body. Body scan awareness is a practice that trains this ability, a systematic observation of physical sensations from head to toe, used to calm the nervous system and strengthen interoception, the brain's internal sense of what's happening inside. At its core, the practice enhances communication between the insular cortex and the prefrontal cortex. The insula interprets internal signals, heartbeat, muscle tension, breath, while the prefrontal regions regulate awareness and control. By scanning through the body slowly and deliberately, this neural pathway becomes more defined, improving emotional regulation and physical sensitivity. People who practice regularly show increased insular grey matter density, a structural change associated with self-awareness and reduced anxiety. Physiologically, body scan awareness shifts the balance of the autonomic nervous system. As attention settles on bodily sensations, the parasympathetic branch becomes dominant, lowering heart rate, relaxing muscles, and reducing cortisol levels. This is why even a 10-minute session can produce measurable drops in blood pressure and perceived stress. Historically, this technique originates from Vipassana meditation, and was later integrated into mindfulness-based stress reduction programs developed by John Kabat-Zinn in the 1970s. Clinical studies since then have confirmed its benefits across contexts, from chronic pain management to improved focus in high-performance settings. The process requires no control, only observation. By noticing tension without forcing it to change, the brain learns that awareness itself is enough to release it. Body scan awareness isn't about relaxation as an outcome, but attention as a discipline, a quiet reintroduction between mind and body, where calm emerges not by effort, but by recognition. The scent anchor. Smell is the fastest path to memory. Unlike other senses, scent bypasses the brain's relay center, the thalamus, and travels straight to the amygdala and hippocampus, regions that process emotion and long-term memory. The scent anchor technique uses this shortcut deliberately, pairing a specific smell with a mental state, then recalling that state later through the same scent. The science behind it lies in associative encoding. When the brain links a smell to a particular mood or activity, calm, focus, or motivation, the neural networks representing both become intertwined. Reintroducing the scent reactivates the same emotional and cognitive patterns, almost like pressing a shortcut key in the nervous system. Studies on olfactory conditioning show that consistent scent cues can improve recall, stabilize mood, and even reduce pre-performance anxiety in athletes and musicians. The practice is simple but precise. Choose a scent, perhaps rosemary, lavender, or sandalwood, and use it only in moments of deep focus or relaxation. Over time, the brain learns to associate that aroma with the corresponding mental state. Later, reintroducing the same scent triggers the pattern automatically, activating parasympathetic responses or focus-related brain rhythms. Unlike visual or auditory cues, scent is less likely to blend with daily noise. It remains specific, personal, and deeply embodied. Neuroscientists often describe smell as the most primitive sense, but that's what makes it powerful. It connects directly to instinct. The scent anchor is not about fragrance, but conditioning. It reminds us that sometimes the fastest way to shift the mind isn't through thought at all. It's through the oldest signal the brain still remembers. Thought labeling. Every emotion begins as a thought. Often that thought goes unnoticed, a background signal that shapes behavior before awareness catches up. Thought labeling is the practice of noticing and naming those signals as they arise. It sounds simple, but neurologically, it's one of the most direct ways to regulate the brain's emotional circuitry. When we label a thought, I'm worrying, I'm judging, I'm planning, activity shifts from the amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, to the prefrontal cortex, which governs logic and self-control. This process, known as affect labeling, reduces emotional intensity by turning raw experience into language. The moment we describe an internal state, the brain interprets it as data rather than danger. In that shift, reactivity decreases and awareness expands. Research at UCLA found that subjects who named their emotions during stress showed significantly less amygdala activation and greater engagement in areas tied to reflection and perspective taking. In practice, this means fewer spirals of overthinking, less compulsion to react, and greater clarity of thought. Over time, the neural pathways that connect awareness to regulation strengthen, creating a calmer, more measured baseline of response. The idea has deep roots. In ancient mindfulness traditions, this was called noting. In modern psychology, it appears in cognitive behavioral therapy and mindfulness-based stress reduction. Across forms, the function is the same: turning unconscious reaction into conscious recognition. Thought labeling doesn't stop thinking. It teaches the mind to observe its own movements without fusing to them. The thoughts still come, but they lose their power to pull. In that gap between noticing and reacting, the brain begins to rediscover its quietest form of intelligence, awareness itself. Brain cross-crawl. Movement that crosses the body's midline does more than build coordination. It strengthens communication inside the brain. Brain cross-crawl exercises, where the right arm and left leg move together, then switch, activate the hemispheres in synchrony, improving integration between the logical and emotional centers of the mind. The mechanism lies in the corpus callosum, the thick band of nerve fibers connecting both hemispheres. When opposing sides of the body move rhythmically, electrical signaling between hemispheres increases, enhancing bilateral coordination and neural efficiency. This same cross-communication supports language, attention, and emotional regulation. Children naturally develop it through crawling, but in adulthood, sedentary routines and unidirectional activities reduce its activation. The cross-crawl reintroduces that balance, quite literally reconnecting the brain with itself. Research from the University of Waterloo and the National Institute for Fitness and Sport suggests that these alternating movements improve working memory, spatial awareness, and focus by enhancing interhemispheric coherence, the ability of both sides of the brain to process and integrate information simultaneously. Athletes, musicians, and pilots often use similar warm-ups before high-focus tasks because they prime neural timing and rhythm. In practical use, a cross-crawl can be done in a minute, standing upright, touching each elbow to the opposite knee in a slow, deliberate rhythm while breathing evenly. The simplicity hides its depth. Coordination, balance, and attention all converge into a unified neural rhythm. The brain cross-crawl reminds us that cognition isn't just in the head. It's distributed across hemispheres, muscles, and movement. Sometimes the surest way to think better is to move in a way that teaches the brain to work as one. The curiosity hour. Curiosity is one of the brain's oldest drives, yet it's the first thing modern life dulls. The curiosity hour is a simple attempt to bring it back. A set time to learn or explore something, purely because it interests you, not because it's useful. Neuroscientists have found that curiosity activates the brain's dopaminergic circuit, the same network that responds to pleasure and reward. When we follow our curiosity, dopamine levels rise, improving attention, memory, and learning. What's more interesting is that this effect extends beyond the subject we're curious about. Once triggered, the brain absorbs all information more efficiently. In practice, this means even brief periods of genuine interest make the mind more receptive afterward. A 2014 UC Davis study showed participants remembered unrelated material better when they were already curious about something else. Curiosity doesn't just sharpen learning, it primes the brain for exploration itself. The curiosity hour works because it restores a sense of wonder to thinking. It reminds the brain that learning isn't a chore tied to achievement, but a natural form of reward. For many, it becomes a mental reset, a small return to the way the mind was built to function. When curiosity leads, motivation follows naturally. Micro-learning sprint. Learning is most effective when the brain is slightly challenged but never fatigued. The micro-learning sprint is built on that balance. Short, focused bursts of study, followed by deliberate breaks, designed to match how the brain encodes and retains information. At the center of this method is spaced repetition and cognitive chunking. The brain learns by forming neural clusters, small groups of related concepts stored together. when learning happens in brief, repeated intervals. These clusters consolidate more effectively in the hippocampus and then transfer to the neocortex for long-term storage. Extended study sessions, by contrast, exhaust neurotransmitter reserves and create diminishing returns. Research from the University of Illinois and MIT shows that concentration peaks between 20 and 40 minutes. After that, attention declines sharply, while error rates increase. Micro-learning sprints leverage this curve, compressing focus into contained intervals where the prefrontal cortex can perform at its highest efficiency. Each sprint acts like a neural repetition, brief enough to avoid fatigue, frequent enough to strengthen recall. This approach is also emotionally sustainable. Short, well-defined learning sessions reduce mental resistance, making consistency easier to maintain. Whether studying language, skill, or concept, the process mirrors how dopamine-driven motivation works, rewarding progress without overwhelming the system. What makes micro-learning sprints effective is their respect for cognitive rhythm. They align effort with how the brain actually learns rather than how we wish it did. The technique isn't about doing more in less time, but about using time in a way that lets the brain build knowledge naturally, one small, deliberate sprint at a time. Mind mapping. The brain doesn't store information in straight lines. It organizes knowledge in networks, branching webs of association that connect ideas through meaning, not sequence. Mind mapping is a technique that mirrors this natural architecture, translating the brain's non-linear thought patterns into visual form. Instead of writing notes in lists, a mind map begins with a single concept at the center. From there, related ideas radiate outward like branches of a neuron. Each connection forms a link, visual, linguistic, or emotional, that reinforces memory through associative encoding. The process engages both hemispheres, the left for structure and language, the right for imagery and spatial awareness. This dual activation enhances integration across the corpus callosum, improving comprehension and recall. Research from the University of London and Johns Hopkins University shows that students who create visual maps rather than linear notes demonstrate stronger understanding and long-term retention. The reason lies in how semantic networks are built. Each new link strengthens existing pathways, allowing faster retrieval when recalling or applying knowledge later. Mind mapping also externalizes thought, freeing working memory from overload. By visualizing complexity, the prefrontal cortex can step back from managing details and focus on synthesis, seeing relationships that linear writing often conceals. It's as much a tool for creativity as it is for clarity. Developed formally in the 1970s by Tony Buzan, but intuitively practiced for centuries, mind mapping aligns note-taking with cognition itself. It doesn't change how the brain learns. It reflects it. In essence, mind mapping is not about drawing ideas. It's about thinking the way the brain already does, in connections, not lists. Random input game. Creativity often depends less on inspiration and more on disruption. The random input game uses that principle deliberately, introducing unrelated stimuli to provoke new neural connections and break habitual patterns of thought. The brain's default mode network, active during reflection and idea generation, relies on existing associations. It connects familiar concepts in familiar ways. Random input interrupts that flow, forcing the prefrontal cortex to bridge unrelated ideas, activating what neuroscientists call remote associative processing, the ability to find meaningful links between distant concepts. This is the foundation of creative insight. The technique is simple. Take a random word, image, or object and connect it to the problem you're trying to solve. The randomness triggers a mild conflict in the brain's predictive coding system. Because the input doesn't fit existing schemas, the mind compensates by exploring new conceptual routes. This activates the anterior cingulate cortex, the region responsible for cognitive flexibility and adaptive thinking. Studies in divergent thinking show that introducing unrelated prompts increases originality scores by over 40% compared to structured brainstorming. The process essentially expands the brain's semantic field, allowing ideas to cross boundaries they normally wouldn't. It's the same mental mechanism behind accidental discoveries, from penicillin to post-it notes. The random input game isn't about chaos, it's about friction, creating just enough disruption for the brain to reorganize itself. By intentionally colliding unrelated thoughts, we remind the mind of its true strength, not recall, but recombination. In a world optimized for efficiency, this practice invites inefficiency, the kind that allows novelty to appear. Opposite thinking trick. The human brain prefers confirmation over contradiction. It's wired to protect existing beliefs, not challenge them. The opposite thinking trick deliberately flips that instinct, a simple practice of asking, what if the opposite were true, to engage the brain's deeper reasoning circuits and break cognitive inertia. This technique draws on the principle of cognitive dissonance, the discomfort the brain feels when holding conflicting ideas. Normally, the mind resolves this tension by discarding the new idea. But when we engage in opposite thinking voluntarily, we override that reflex. The dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, responsible for abstract reasoning, begins generating alternative models instead of defending the default one. This increases neural flexibility, the brain's capacity to hold competing perspectives without emotional interference. Psychologists studying creativity at the University of Amsterdam found that reframing problems through deliberate contradiction increased solution fluency by nearly 30%. It works because opposite thinking activates right hemisphere associative networks, which handle pattern recognition and metaphor, while the left hemisphere maintains logical evaluation. The interaction between the two produces a synthesis, the kind of insight that feels both surprising and self-evident. In daily life, it can be used to unstick thought loops. If a plan isn't working, imagine why the opposite plan might succeed. If an assumption feels certain, explore how it could be false. The point isn't to believe the inversion, but to think through it. Opposite thinking trains the mind to value dissonance as data, to treat contradiction not as a threat, but as an instrument of clarity. In doing so, it transforms skepticism into a form of intelligence. Curiosity Scrapbook. The brain strengthens what it collects. The Curiosity Scrapbook uses this principle to turn fleeting wonder into structured intelligence, a simple practice of capturing anything that sparks interest without judging its relevance or purpose. At the neural level, curiosity activates the dopaminergic reward system, particularly the ventral tegmental area and nucleus accumbens. These regions not only heighten motivation, but also improve hippocampal encoding, meaning the brain remembers information better when it's driven by curiosity. Recording those sparks, quotes, ideas, images, questions, creates a map of where the brain wants to go next. Over time, the scrapbook becomes an externalized form of long-term memory, one organized not by logic, but by fascination. The value lies in the act of revisiting. When we return to our collected fragments, the default mode network, responsible for associative thinking, begins linking them in new ways. What once seemed unrelated starts forming patterns. This is the architecture of insight. Disconnected curiosities becoming coherent knowledge through reflection. Historically, thinkers like Leonardo da Vinci and Charles Darwin maintained such notebooks, filled with sketches, half-thoughts, and contradictions. They weren't trying to be productive, they were training their perception to notice. Modern cognitive science confirms what they practiced intuitively, that curiosity, when captured and reactivated, strengthens neural plasticity and keeps cognitive decline at bay. The Curiosity Scrapbook is less about accumulation than attention. It reminds the brain what it finds beautiful, odd, or unresolved, and in doing so, keeps the mind alive to discovery. Each note becomes a small negotiation between memory and imagination, the raw material from which new ideas quietly emerge. Sleep anchor routine. The brain doesn't fall asleep on command. It transitions. The sleep anchor routine creates a predictable sequence that guides that transition, signaling to the nervous system that the day is closing and restoration is about to begin. Sleep is regulated by two systems: the circadian rhythm, which aligns with light and darkness, and homeostatic pressure, which builds fatigue as we stay awake. But neither works efficiently in isolation. What stabilizes them is consistency, repeating cues that the brain learns to associate with rest. The sleep anchor routine functions as that cue, using a fixed sequence of calming behaviors performed in the same order each night. When the sequence becomes habitual, the basal ganglia, the brain's pattern center, begins to automate the transition. The amygdala interprets the ritual as safety, lowering cortisol levels and activating the parasympathetic nervous system, which slows heart rate and prepares the body for sleep. Even small repeated actions, dimming lights, stretching, reading, or journaling, acquire associative power over time. They act as neural anchors, conditioning the brain to move predictably from wakefulness to rest. Clinical studies on insomnia treatment show that structured pre-sleep routines can reduce sleep latency by up to 40%. The reason is not the content of the routine, but its reliability. The predictability itself becomes a form of neural reassurance. The sleep anchor routine works because it replaces willpower with rhythm. Rather than forcing sleep, it reminds the brain what it already knows, that restoration is a learned pattern, not a performance. Micro-gratitude pause. The brain's emotional state is not fixed, it's constantly recalibrated by what it pays attention to. The micro-gratitude pause uses that fact to nudge the brain toward balance. It's not a journal, not a ritual, but a 10-second interruption in ordinary moments to acknowledge something simple that's going right. The science behind it lies in neuroplasticity and selective attention. When we pause to register gratitude, a warm drink, a solved problem, a brief silence, the ventromedial prefrontal cortex and nucleus accumbens activate, releasing dopamine and serotonin. These chemicals don't just lift mood, they train the brain to notice stability and safety, countering the negativity bias, a survival mechanism that keeps us focused on threats. Unlike extended gratitude practices, micro-gratitude relies on frequency, not depth. Each brief acknowledgement creates a micro-shift in the default mode network, the system involved in self-referential thought. Over time, these pauses reduce rumination and strengthen emotional regulation networks in the anterior cingulate cortex. The cumulative effect is subtle but measurable, lower baseline anxiety and a faster recovery from stress. Psychologists studying daily affect regulation have found that micro-gratitude interventions outperform long reflection exercises when maintained over weeks, not because they're more powerful, but because they're sustainable. They embed gratitude into the flow of normal cognition rather than isolating it as a task. The micro-gratitude pause doesn't change circumstances. It changes the frame through which the brain perceives them. By quietly interrupting its own autopilot, the mind remembers that appreciation isn't an emotion to chase. It's a lens that can be reactivated, one moment at a time.